All right. Welcome back to another episode of Persuasion by the Pint. I am Sean McCool without Jonathan Taylor today. He is on the road traveling, was going to try to make it from a local brewery, pub, whatever, but was not able to make the timing work out as we're recording here on Friday. But I do have a special guest with me. So I'm going to be bringing her on here in just a minute. Like I said, this is episode 350. We're going to be talking about why it pays to be polarizing. So, my guest is someone I've worked with personally. She is a brand strategist, copywriter turned brand strategist. And when I asked her on, she asked her what she wanted to talk about. And this is what she came up with, why it pays to be polarizing. So, we're going to jump in because I don't know how to do this solo. So, I'm going to bring her in and we don't have our sound effects either because, that's on the other end. So please welcome Andrea Brizendine to the show. Hi, Andrea.
Hi. Happy to
How
be
are you?
your emotional support animal. Well,
Yes.
it's gone.
Thank you. I may have to have an extra beer today. I don't know.
Yeah.
So without Jonathan does usually all the fancy stuff. He's got the control board back at his office and he does the intro. So yeah, it feels weird. Just having to take over the reins like this. So we'll see. We'll see if we can make it through.
Yeah.
So before we get started, kind of give the listeners a little bit of a tease about what we're going to be talking about. And then we'll get into our beverages and all that stuff.
Yeah. So we're talking about why it pays to be polarizing. The reason I want to talk about this is the same reason why I am a copywriter turned brand strategist. I realized after a while that I was having clients come to me with broken sales funnels and the copy was technically not that bad. It was just kind of so what. So I want to start getting to people before things break. And part of that is the positioning and the messaging and figuring out how to stand out and what makes you different.
Yeah, very cool. And you work specifically with a lot of coaches, right?
Mm-hmm. Coaches, course creators. Yeah.
Okay. Big niche, and big niches cause some problems. And that's what we'll be talking about and hopefully how to solve them. So we'll see. So you said we have a sucky onboarding process for this podcast.
Yes.
We did not do a good job of letting you know to bring a beverage, apparently. So,
I wasn't sure because I think the only episodes that I've listened to have been when people don't have a beverage, just so happened. So I wasn't sure if it was just something that like you and Jonathan riff on or which I recently realized that I do better gluten-free. So I would have brought on my like a gluten-free, very California beer. And you could have made fun of me for that. So
that would have been fun.
Yeah.
It's a shame we missed that opportunity. So
yeah.
Well, tell us what you are having because it's also very California. So tell us what you're having on the show today.
Having a turmeric ginger tea because who likes fun? Not me. So it's nice though. It's spicy. It's warm. It's very cold out today, even though it's Southern California. It's like, I don't even think it's 70 degrees outside. Yeah, that's.
And you're not even close to like June gloom yet, right?
No, it's just been a very long winter here.
That makes for good. Does it make for good surfing? Do you surf?
I don't. Keenan does because he's not afraid. I see those waves coming up like right under the pier, and I'm like, yeah, I value my life. I'm good. So
yeah. So have the waves been better this year though, with the cold weather and the?
Yeah. The storms usually make it better if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, I watch Point Break. I think I understand. Got to chase the storms.
Yeah,
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I am having on the show today. This is fun. So I'm having a caramel mocha latte. It is a mocha latte golden stout, to be specific. It's a lot going on. Usually these things have like a 9 or 12% ABV. This one's only 6, and it's from Belching Beaver Brewery, which they have some pretty wild stuff going on. So This says a century adventure in a can. Our caramel mocha latte defies the norms of brewing convention by packing in the robust coffeehouse flavors of a dark brew within the soft and easy drinkability of a lighter blonde style. Very smooth with caramel backbone and notes of coffee, chocolate, and subtle hints of baking spice, this brew venture just might become your best part of waking up. Well, I don't know if I'm going to try the waking up thing. That's and it's very, very light.
Yeah.
To be called a golden stout. I think this is the second golden stout I've had in like a month or so on the show. So
I didn't realize that was even a thing because I love stout.
I didn't either.
I've never heard of that.
I think it's marketing. I know there's technically a difference between like what they use to brew a stout compared to like a whatever lager or anything else. But it just doesn't feel as thick. It's definitely lighter.
Yeah. Does it taste like what was it? Caramel mocha latte?
Yeah, not exactly. But let's go ahead and we'll do cheers. We don't have the sound effects, but we'll do cheers anyway. Cheers.
Ding.
Ding. Does it taste like a caramel mocha latte? No, it does not.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's the right color for that.
Yeah, it seems like, if you're going to go the coffee route, like I understand a latte has a lot of tan to it because of the milk.
Mm-hmm.
But this, it's not bad. It's just not what I would expect for that can when I buy it and pull it off the shelf.
It's not like overly sweet?
No, it's not sweet. Which should have been a giveaway with the 6% alcohol because usually they're not as sweet. Obviously, when you get down to that point, as they get sweet, they go up in alcohol. No, I mean it's a. I'm trying to think what it's definitely got some hints of caramel. I don't really taste much mocha at all. I don't really taste a lot of coffee. Like I do taste a little bit of caramel, but that's about it. So a little bit of a letdown. So we usually rate our drinks on the show 1 to 5 pints.
Okay.
You can have decimal places after the decimal. I keep saying you can have as many decimal places as you want, but only 1 decimal.
It's not really
have as many numbers after the decimal as you want.
So. All right. Well, I'm going to give mine. I'll give it a 3 for it not being a beer. It's all right.
Is it your go-to? Just kind of beer.
Yeah, okay. Like it's my middle of the day, can't have more caffeine drink.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's sad that the middle of the day drink is only a 3. Like if it's your go-to middle of the day drink and it's only a 3, that seems kind of sad. Like maybe you should search a little bit more and try to find something else.
I never thought of that. And I have a lot to think about now.
Well, that's what I do. I help people create existential crises in their life so I can solve them. So yeah, that's part of what I do. So I'm going to give mine it's a good beer. It's just it's kind of like with copy. Like if you oversell it, even if it's a good product, like there's a little bit of a letdown.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's what happened here. So I'm still going to give it I can't give it a 4. I'm going to give it a 3.99 because it's right there. It's just the marketing. I can't give it the 4 in front of the decimal. It just doesn't feel right. You know what I mean?
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. But got to punish them somehow.
Yeah, they tried.
But they got a little heavy-handed on the description. Could have put a little more coffee in it.
Try it when you wake up, maybe.
Maybe that's the secret.
That's better.
I like your thinking. I will give that a shot. All right. So, hold on. We got a comment. We don't get these very often, so I wanted to. Look who it is. Look who found a computer and an internet connection. Jonathan Taylor, please move on from the juvenile beer talk.
Please make it to your podcast on time.
Uh-oh. We got a sassy one today, Jonathan. You better watch out.
Can you imagine if I was drinking?
What's in that turmeric? Got a little shot of bourbon in there or something. So, well, let's move on from the juvenile beer talk. Yeah. And that was I don't know if do you know that story, Andrea? No. Juvenile beer talk.
No.
We had a YouTube commenter early in the show who said that basically to us. Like, this is a great show except for the juvenile beer talk at the beginning. So We since adopted that as like the segment name.
See, that's a great segue actually into what we're talking about, because that's a little bit polarizing, right?
Right. Perfect.
Yeah. So love it.
So tell me more. Well, first tell people about your background.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just tell them kind of, I don't know, wherever you want to start up to now, and then we'll jump into the actual polarizing stuff.
Yeah. So I started off as a content writer back in like 2015, 16, ventured into direct response copy, started working with brands like the Institute of Luxury Home Marketing and Elite Healthcare and McKissick. So did a lot of like healthcare and real estate stuff, worked with a lot of luxury real estate agents, not realizing that part of what I was doing was helping them position themselves and work on their messaging, even though I was not technically hired to do that. Ended up moving into an agency setting for a while with you, which is where we met, did our thing, and worked with some fairly big brands. And that, I think that was around the time when you sort of planted this in me. You kind of pointed out like, hey, the stuff that's doing well, they stand for something, like that's kind of what's going on here. And I took that seed that you planted and ran with it, because that stuck in my head. And I started really noticing that, especially like after I left the agency and started working with my own clients, like that's really what ends up coming up. And I've worked with a lot of coaches, I typically now work with personal brands, coaches, consultants, course creators, authors, even musicians. I've had like musician clients. And that, yeah, so that's kind of been the trajectory. And I'd say, what year is it now? 2024. So late 2022, I decided to really go all in on the brand strategy. And I was able to get certified through Level C, which is Marty Neumeier's brand strategist certification. He's kind of like the grandfather of brand. So yeah, that's kind of been my journey.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, we had some fun at the agency, didn't we?
Yeah.
It will remain nameless, but
It was
good days and some bad days. It was a lot of learning though, very fast, which was
so
good.
much more. Yeah, it was like marketing boot camp. And it was such an interesting time too, because we were doing it in 2020 when a lot of people were going online, and there was this huge gap to fill. Like it was so easy to go online and, just have stuff work, because the whole thing was kind of new. So
yeah, I think I came on in April of 2020, when everything was hitting the fan, like literally weeks in. You had already been there for a little while. Yeah. And I was kind of thrown into the deep ends. There was two divisions. I quickly realized I wanted to be on the agency side of this particular brand, and that's where you and some of the team were. So yeah, I mean, it was good. We had a good time, learned a lot, had some wins, had some failures, but let's talk about that for a second, and then we'll get into specifically like why it pays to be polarizing. But I've been thinking a lot about this myth that's out there, especially as more and more people compete, that there is a secret marketing, and that, even like 50%, like you've got a 50% shot of coming up with a winning idea or marketing campaign or funnel or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And the odds are not quite that good.
No, they're not.
So how do you talk to clients about what to realistically expect? That's one thing we tried to do. I tried to do when I came into the agency, was set better expectations, not promise the moon. How do you do that with your clients now, with the competition we have and more people online, and more and more people knowing about coaches, market sophistication, all that stuff?
Yeah. I go into everything saying that nothing is set it and forget it, because that's the way it's been sold. And so it's like, well, the one funnel away thing. And so I set the expectation immediately that we will need to test everything. We will need to test the offer. We will need to test the messaging. We will need to test the price. Like there are all these things, and you may get lucky and you may only need a few tests, or you may get it right on the first try. I mean, I launched ads the other day thinking that it was going to be this huge experiment, but my first ad like crushed it. I was getting leads for like $1.20, but I had so many tests like lined up because I was just going into it expecting to lose a lot of money. And that is sort of the conversation that I have with people, is like, you're not losing, you're learning. And there is just this like upfront process where you just kind of have to be okay with that. And it's nothing personal, and it's nothing, it doesn't mean that you're not cut out for this. It's just there is a lot of competition. So that's kind of how I handle that.
Yeah, and the platform has matured. The platforms, whether you're talking about Facebook or TikTok, or like, they're all maturing, and they mature faster and faster. Each one that comes out is maturing faster. It's getting more competition faster, getting more saturation faster. Yeah, I tell people all the time, we've talked about on this show, that it's baseball just keeps coming up as like the best analogy for what to expect. If you're a 300 hitter, you're in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just getting on base. That's not even like, it's not like you're a 300 hitter and all of those hits are home runs. That's just getting on first base, where maybe you recover your lead cost, or, maybe minus 20% and you can make it up, that kind of stuff. I think that's much more realistic for people if they understand that coming in, and understand you. Because even if you have a winner out the gate, like you just had, there is no telling if that'll last a week or 2 years. Like, you just don't know.
Right. And that is the same, I've noticed, with choosing a message that is polarizing, because what was polarizing 4 years ago is not necessarily polarizing now, because things catch up. So like 4 years ago, a lot of people, we had clients who had keto funnels, and like, it was so polarizing to be like, oh, it's not low fat that's that'll help you lose weight. You got to eat like high fat and no carbs. And like, that was like, whoa. But now if you try to continue that messaging, or like put something out there with that messaging, people are like, okay, so what? Like, yeah,
I tried that.
Right.
Yeah.
So so that's what I mean by nothing, set it and forget it, because you will have to continue to keep an eye on the market and an eye on what your ideal client or ideal customer is thinking and saying and doing, so that you can actually find the right gap to fill and find that strong stance, because it will change.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. But when did you first start? Like, when do you first remember like getting online and being on the internet and stuff? You're a generation younger than me, so
yeah. I first got online when I was either 12 or 13, and
so what year would that have been?
That was 2002 or 3-ish.
Pretty early. Yeah, pretty early, right in there.
Yeah.
I remember in 2000 or 99, actually, right before the .com crash. I was actually trying to sell websites to restaurants when I lived in Northern Virginia, DC area. And they looked at me like I had 4 heads. Like, they were like, why would anybody pull out their computer and look up a restaurant online? And when we tried to pull up an example website and we had to use dial-up and it took 10 minutes to load, I was like, you're kind of right. I don't know why anybody would do this. Now, like, but even then I remember there was this kind of unspoken belief that if I put up a website, I do it once and I'll never have to do it again. Because for years, if a company had a brochure, like a print brochure that you walked in their store and you took their brochure off the counter, like, that thing was good for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
You just reprinted it, and maybe if you were cutting edge, you might reshoot the photos, but probably not. I mean, most people didn't, Now, like, if you're not updating your website to the latest styles and fonts and colors and graphics every 18 months, I mean, it looks dated very quickly. And you're saying the messaging is the same way.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people come to me, I would say in the last 2 years, especially, where they're like, they take it as like they've failed, like they're
Mm.
like that they're done because it worked a few years ago and now it doesn't. And they're like, this is like my last ditch effort. I'm like, no, it's not. Like this is the process. Like this is what you do is, it's probably gonna continue to speed up. Like, you said
Yeah.
18 months, like I'm sure that in 18 months from now, it's going to be more like every year. You need to kind of check in and look at stuff.
Yeah. I mean, luckily AI will be able to do it all for us, so we don't have to worry about it. But
Right. We're so close to being able to just not work and live in the woods.
yeah, I don't know who's going to buy anything, and because if nobody's getting working and nobody's getting paid, I'm not sure who's buying anything. I don't know how that works, but that's another topic. We'll get into AI here in a bit because I do want your opinion on that. But so when somebody comes to you, Andrea, and they're like, my stuff's not working, I'm a failure, I'm an imposter, it was luck, whatever, whatever their sob story was, where do you start with them? Let's say it's a coach. Because whether it's a coach, what are some of the other ones you said that you work with?
Course creator,
course creators.
authors, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of all see those as the same.
Personal brands.
Yeah, which is exactly to your point, right? I see all those as the same.
Yep.
So, because I'm like, well, every author has a course or should. Every course creator probably should have a book. They should all have a back end coaching package. Like to me, it's all kind of the thought leader, knowledge worker type person.
Yeah.
So where do you start with them? Because that's like you said, it's a huge industry and it's still growing. So we're gonna have more people coming in. Where do you start with them? Like, are there preliminary questions you ask? Like, where do you start?
Yeah. So if it's someone who's been at it, like they're not creating a new business, I always look to see like what has worked, right? Like we go back into their email metrics, we go back into their social media, right? And like, let's see what resonated at some point or like recently that maybe we can lean into. And it kind of gives me an idea of what their ideal client actually wants. And if that doesn't look so good, then we do go into like, okay, well, who do you serve and what do they really want? And typically, what people think the problem that people think they solve is usually not the problem, or it's not the problem anymore, and they've got to go like 2-3 layers deeper and keep asking, well, why do they want it? And the guideline that I give there is like, you got to go deep enough to where it hits on like a primal need, so that there's that emotional urgency, so you don't have to always have that like fake urgency of like a count on timer and all that. So like, does it tie into safety and security? Can you tie what they want into intimacy or belonging, or, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And that's where you start to differentiate. It's not, so I have 3 steps, and that is step 1, where you've got to know that person and what they really want, and what they want has to kind of hit a nerve with them.
So I've got 2 questions. One, do you prefer working with someone who was successful and now they're trying to have to rethink, or somebody who's brand new? Do you have a preference? Is the process, how much different is the process?
It's not truly like, the only difference is that the person who's kind of pivoting has some data to look at.
Right. Which could be a sandbag in some ways, right? Because you're
right. Yeah. Because it's harder to detach from like things that have worked, or, and it's still sort of an assumption. Like, and again, bottom line is you're still going to have to test. And so, it can be frustrating.
It's like the difference between, if you do a whole house remodel versus new construction. New construction's actually easier than a whole house remodel. Whole house remodel is a lot messier.
Yeah.
And often takes longer and is more expensive.
Yeah.
Than a new build even.
Yeah. And so like, as far as the mechanics of working with someone, starting from scratch is easier. But I prefer like the emotional satisfaction of someone pivoting, because it's usually someone who's like, they think they're done. And I love being like, no, look, like we can fix it. So that's, I think, more satisfying for me, but definitely easier to do from scratch, where there are less expectations.
And I think from a coaching side, if I was working with someone, I'd rather work with someone who's at least had some success,
Mhm.
because there's some resilience there, and there's some if you can get them past this little hump and tap back into that, there's a lot of power there. Whereas somebody who's never really made it before, you get a lot more imposter syndrome to work through, possibly,
Yeah.
than not. So my other question was, how is this different than this whole niche within a nicheception, stuff that we hear about all the time? Like, is
Do you
it
wanna
different or is it the same thing?
what do you mean? You wanna
So you're talking
elaborate?
about a message, like narrowing the message,
Mhm.
but we hear a lot of talk about narrowing your niche.
Mhm.
Is it the same thing or is it different?
It's a little different because so what I've found is that you can kind of vary from offer to offer. Like, you don't necessarily have to, like, change your niche. Like, it's kind of just like, who are you speaking to with this offer? You may like, it may feel narrower, but the narrowness comes from, like, that need, like, that person and what they want, and it's not necessarily like you've gotta, like, start dipping into, like, all these sub niches. Like, it's more, about being very specific with, like, what that problem is that you're addressing, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're dipping into, like, another little pocket.
Yeah.
That makes
It's
sense.
yeah, what you say about urgency reminds me when I worked with Rush Rufino at Clients on Demand. He said he told me that one time when we were talking about some copy. He was like, the urgency should come from their life,
Mhm.
not from your tactics or anything else, right?
Right.
Now, with that said, deadlines work,
Mhm.
right? If you it's easier to sell something with a start date than without. It just is.
Mhm.
Of course, you have to do that over and over, so there's some give and take there, the launch versus evergreen type stuff. But the real urgency that's going to make them want to buy or not is that urgency from their life to solve that pain.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I've seen, Donald Trump is a good example. Like, he doesn't necessarily always have the right words. Like, like, he's not super strategic there sometimes, but he's very polarizing, and he's got the right messaging and positioning. And so, like, those little details don't matter as much because,
mm,
like, that filter that it's filtered through is kind of what's making it. And I've seen the same thing with sales funnels where the copy isn't great, but, like, the sentiment behind it and, like, the message behind it, the positioning is so strong that that person reading it is like, yeah, this makes sense. Like, this, I believe that this can help me because I've not heard this before. Like, so that's, it makes it less important to be as technical with the copy and all that.
yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, if you can let people know that what they're going through,
Mm-hmm.
the copy is not that. Like, as copywriters, it's hard to like admit that sometimes, but like
Mm-hmm.
at best, copy is a third of the equation.
Yeah.
The other is the list, and then the offer, and the offer slash list gets into what you're talking about. Like, the combination of the list and the offer is kind of what is that personal problem they're going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
The copy just, I mean, like you said, it doesn't have to be great. And a lot of times, a simpler, I've seen complete newbies who really understand a market, or a founder who really understands the nuance of a market. Even as a professional copywriter, in the past, it's been hard for me to go in and beat like a founder or an owner's voice,
Yeah.
because they have so much nuance about the person that takes months and months for a copywriter to really get, if they ever get it at all.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that, you said that was part one of your process, to really find that thing that their
Mm-hmm.
prospect is dealing with, that kind of that core need, primal need.
Yep.
Um, does that scare your clients to like go after that one thing?
Um,
Do they get nervous that it's not going
Honestly,
to be enough people, or?
honestly, that hasn't come up as much as I thought that it would. Like, I really, because it came up for me, like, as a copywriter, like, when I was positioning myself for clients, I was like, "Well, if I choose, like, just optimizing sales funnels, or if I just work with coaches or what, like I
Yeah.
freaked myself out about that. Um, but my clients are more resilient than me, I guess. But yeah, no, it actually has not come up as much as I thought. What about you? Do you feel that you've worked with people who are afraid to get that specific?
Yeah, I think there's a certain type of client for sure that does that, and I think they tend to be fairly. I think it's probably not a certain type of client; it's a certain type of thinker, probably that does that. Someone who has an ability to. I think as copywriters, we're kind of cursed with that because we're trained to see both sides of an argument, so we can figure out the best way to do the argument.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people that lean into and get good at copywriting or strategy of any kind, consulting, like I think they have a natural bent to like see multiple sides of a problem, right?
Yep.
So because they can see so much, then they're like, oh, but if I do this, I'm leaving out this. Where other people and it's hard for me to understand because I don't have that worldview, right? I can't, like, I see, if I see a problem, I see 16 ways to deal with it, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's hard for me to believe that not everybody feels that way. My wife tells me all the time, like, not everybody thinks like you do. I'm like, how do they think? Because I don't understand like how they think. If they don't see the world like this, how do they see the world?
Yeah.
So I think it's a certain type of client more than it is anything else.
Yeah.
And
I think.
the bigger the thinker, I think the harder it is for them to. And I don't mean that in like a negative way, like small thinking. I mean, I just think some people just have very detailed type thinking, and some of us have big vision. Like we think wide, some people think deep, and I think
Yeah.
that's probably the difference.
I have a lot of admiration for clients who can just like sign up and go like, okay, you tell me what to do. Cause like, I struggle with that. Like,
Yeah,
and it might be because so many of them are coaches, they're coachable. So they're just like, okay, I hired you,
yeah,
which is nice. So yeah.
yeah. All right, so that's step one. What was step two? You said you had three steps. What's step two?
Mhm. So step 2 is taking a strong stance. So once you know who you're talking to, what they really want, how do you believe that problem needs to be solved? And so the way that I pose it to clients is like, what does your ideal client either absolutely have to do or absolutely not have to do to get the result they want? And that usually starts those gears going.
That is so tough for me. Like I see it all the time online, like dogmatism,
Mhm.
especially on social media. Just, I mean, it's why we picked the show title, right? It pays to be polarizing.
Mhm.
Like very definitive, very absolute, like no weasel words.
Yep.
Just like, I believe this, period, right? Carnivore only, right? Keto only. Um, you know, everything's about manifestation. Whatever your niche is,
Mhm.
the more dogmatic you can be, it seems like the better it is. Is that I say dogmatic, you're saying polarizing.
Same.
Um, okay.
Yeah.
Um, I find that very, very difficult to do for myself personally.
So I saw something you posted the other day about how you love that you can speak on a lot of things, you know a lot of things, and all, you don't want to be pigeonholed into just, you know, copywriting, or you want to be able to talk about quantum
Yeah.
manifestation, but that is kind of your strong stance, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
you
So
want.
walk me through that because I've kind of had that inkling and I'm
Mhm.
like, but is it really? So help me. This is one reason we do this podcast to get free coaching. So help me understand, like, how would you position someone? Because I think there's a lot of people like that. They kind of have
Mhm.
that. I think there's people that they're just naturally lean into the dogmatism, the type A's. They can just, they can stick
Mhm.
with one thing. They eat the same thing every day. Like that's just who they are, right? And then you got the variety spice of life
Mhm.
people. You're like, sorry, not that people that are like one thing don't enjoy the spice of life, but my biases are coming out. Yeah, how do you help someone like that, like me,
Mhm.
turn that into a polarizing stance?
Because you're going to find people who don't want to have some sort, like, some people find that strong stance and that like dogmatic approach to things too rigid. And so the clients who are attracted to you probably really appreciate that fluidity and probably also struggle with that themselves, where they don't want to be pigeonholed. And so like your um you could argue that your strong stance is that, like, how important it is to be fluid, especially in the second half of your life, where, like, let it be new, let it be what it is, right? Like, you don't have to be the gym guy, you don't have to be the sad retiree who's sitting on his couch. Like, you, like, the whole world is open to you. And
Yeah.
so you model that by talking about all these different things. And I would assume that you encourage your clients to be open to life and not being so rigid, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So my my dogmatic stance is to not be dogmatic.
Yeah. Yep.
It's very meta, I think. I don't know.
It's very
I
meta.
never use that term quite right, but um,
Feels right.
yeah, yeah, feels right. So, okay. Um, so I'm on my second beer, so you may have to start driving here pretty soon.
Okay.
Especially since we don't. I mean, Jonathan's usually gone by this point, so um, so we talked the first 2 points. Recap the 2 points, and then we'll
So the
move to
first is really identifying what the real problem it is you solve for your client until you get deep enough where it hits a nerve, hits one of those primal needs like security, safety, intimacy, belonging, expression. Step two is taking a strong stance on how that problem should be solved. And I do want to add too, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be um, what your bottom line usually is, like, what your client absolutely does or does not need to do to get the result they want. But other ways to think about it is, like, what bothers you about your industry? Like, you can usually find your strong stance in questions like that, like the answers to those questions. um and, like, why did you look at the market that you're in and go, like, hey, I could do that better, right? Like, that's usually where that strong stance is going to come out. Like, what's that hill that you would die on? And what is that
yeah,
thing you get on your high horse about? That's usually where it's hiding, because some people do get like, I guess intimidated by, like, taking a strong stance, because they're like, well, I'm not a loud person, like, I'm not an opinionated person or whatever. It doesn't necessarily need to be like that. Like, Apple takes a strong stance on minimalism and, like, being sleek and efficient, but they don't hit you over the head with it. Like, you can
mm,
just, they exude that stance without being loud and obnoxious. So that's, just another way to think about it. So that it's not just like you have to be dogmatic about something, like it.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it felt good when you said it when I heard it, and used the Apple example. Although Steve Jobs is probably much louder about it internally, from what I've read and understand. But I like that. That I do think a lot of times we think polarizing, and taking a strong stance, to use your words, has to be loud,
Mhm.
right? And I think that comes from just people we've known in the past, just
Yeah.
people we've, known personally that are really like rigid tend to be loud as well.
Mhm.
So I think that's a great distinction, that you don't have to be, that you can do it in a much softer, more caring way.
Right.
A little bit more finesse, tact, whatever you might want to call it.
Right.
And Apple, I think Apple's a good example of that. How might a coach, do you have a coaching client that comes to mind that does that well? Or
Mm-hmm. So, so business coaches, this happens a lot because it feels like helping people make money. It like to them it feels strong enough to stand on its own. It's like, well, everyone wants to make money, right? Like, so like why would I have to like oversell this? But really, like there's so many business coaches. And I had one that I worked with who had a sales page that used to work. And but in conversation with her, what kept coming up was like her clients, the real problem was that they had a fear of being seen. Like it really stemmed from like they dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, but imposter syndrome is pretty overdone, right? So it was kind of like figuring out what she really does with clients, and it turned out to be fear of being seen. So we went through her sales page, and that was like the new filter that we filtered everything through. It was like, this is why my process is like this, because it's ultimately going to help you get over your fear of being seen so that you can make the money. So, before it was very much like, make 7 figures in your coaching business, and everyone has that. So, and yeah, I can understand why it feels like a strong stance, but it's kind of not. So,
yeah, I remember there was they weren't a client, but I was doing some research, and I ran across this site called I can't remember if it was Quiet Alpha or Silent Alpha.
mm-hmm.
And it was in the men's coaching space. And I thought, like, that is so good. Like, right? Because most men's coaching is like, be strong, go to the gym, like lift 6,000 pounds, like, control, force, power, like all these kind of things. And they took the complete opposite, and they said, actually, the most powerful leaders in the world are very soft and quiet, and they lead, like they might say one word in a conversation that blows the whole room away, and like those, and they had like examples from history and things like that, and it was a very like soft, which very soft stance
Mm-hmm.
of a very hard firm stance. Like, no, you can be the quiet alpha, and you're
Right.
actually more powerful than the loud alpha, was kind of their thing.
Yeah.
So
And
that kind of reminds me.
it adds believability, right? Because the people who have tried the other programs, or maybe tried to identify with the loud alphas, maybe that didn't work or that didn't align. And so now someone comes along with this kind of disruptive message, but still hits on that desire, but also kind of gives like this logical reason why maybe that's not working for them.
And it leans into this, to the core belief of who the person is,
Mhm.
instead of trying to change who the person is, which is
Mhm.
much more difficult.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got the first 2 points. So what is the third piece of the puzzle that you work with?
So the third piece is how you come off. So it's your voice, it's your brand voice. And for most people, it's hard to show up and really be like genuine, because you kind of get into like your marketing voice, right? Like, and you see the voice that other people are using, and you're like, well, I want to be like this person, and you kind of try to mimic them. So the way that I've sort of neutralized that with clients is I give them the 12 brand archetypes, and I kind of go like, well, what's the sweet spot between who you actually are and who your clients kind of need you to be, and which one of these do you identify with? And we kind of go from there, and it gives them an anchor to use when they write their copy. So, if they kind of identify with the everyman, and their clients also sort of identify with the everyman, or that's who they need this person to be, that's the like North Star now for the voice, where, if it's hard to come off how you really come off, well, now you have this like nice little, like these guardrails, because you kind of identify with this brand archetype.
So there's a book I'm thinking about. That's interesting, and it brings up a kind of a thought in my head. So there's a book called The Alter Ego Effect, Todd
Mm-hmm.
Herman,
Yeah.
right? And he talks about like putting on this alter ego when you go out in public and you're kind of doing your thing. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's kind of an outdated model, and like you should just, like, I'm torn there. Like, do you put on this kind of alter ego to best serve the customer, or
No,
do
I think.
you stay authentic? And it's not that, I mean, especially the way, and I want to give Todd Herman full credit. Like, he doesn't talk about being fake. He's like,
Mhm,
it's kind of your higher self almost,
mhm,
that you're trying to pull out.
yep.
Um, and he gives great examples. Like, I think Barry Sanders, when he plays football, he thinks of himself as like a locomotive or something like that. I can't remember exactly. Great book. But I'm curious, like, if there's any nuance there that you feel in today's world with the competition, everything else, that might be adjusted.
I think it's difficult for anybody to not put some sort of alter ego on when they
Yeah.
like show up in public or like at work or any of that. And I think um like I'm thinking about myself. I show up a lot more curmudgeonly than I really am. Like in my social media posts, like I rant. But I'm not, sometimes I'm a little bit more intense and polarizing in my content than I normally would be with someone like face to face. And I think that like it's hard to turn off. And I just think there's some level of like self-protection there. Like I know that's why, like that was some of what Todd Herman talks about in that book, is like it's kind of like, you hang up your hat for the day when you come home and you're not that alter ego anymore.
Yeah.
And it's, I think, especially like when you have an online business and everyone has so many opinions that they can publicly share with you. um, I think it's great that like you can kind of go like, well, that's just kind of how I present myself online, and it doesn't feel quite as bad, maybe potentially.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a line there that you have to be careful with. Like, our last guest last week, last episode, she was talking about like trying to find that kind of thing that makes you unique.
Mhm.
We didn't necessarily go into like alter ego, but like she uses a violin, in all her marketing because she likes to play the violin. So she kind of brings her hobby in, and it makes her distinct and unique.
Mhm.
And she uses analogies and metaphors around that to tell her story. Um, we both know, the man in red, which has been a good gimmick for him.
Yeah.
But it feels gimmicky, but it works at the same
Yeah.
time. So where do you kind of draw the line with your clients between like gimmick and voice? And
So
do you look for props type stuff at all, or is it,
it's a
or
little
not?
so when like for my purposes, it's more like someone could potentially have a very similar offer as you, and they might address the same pain point. They might even have a very similar strong stance, but can they do it how you do it? So like, because the copy, the marketing is kind of someone's first experience of you. Like they're trying to kind of get a grasp of like, what if I sign up with this person, if I buy this thing, what is my experience going to feel like? And so that's really more how I'm looking at voice, is like, you may be a business coach who addresses people's fear of being seen so they can like unlock their maximum financial potential. And someone else might also have those two things in common with you, like someone, in your market, but are they funny and you're funny, like, but are they, are you nurturing and they're kind of intense, like that's kind of where like that's how those three elements just kind of end up coming together and creating like your little unique pocket, because odds are someone's not going to have all three the same. And like the voice is kind of where you can demonstrate that and really like have that experience. So like it's gimmicky to me when someone is too far off from who they are trying to be. It's just like when you meet someone in person and like you can kind of tell that they're trying to be someone that they're not. Like, I'm thinking about like in high school when like kids didn't have an identity. So they're like, I'm a hippie now. It's like, well, no, you're not. And it was just very uncomfortable to like, communicate with them and like hang out because it was weird. So like it only feels gimmicky to me. I shouldn't say only, but it feels gimmicky to me when there's a big gap between like who you can tell the person really is and who they're trying to come off as. So
yeah, I think the best way to look at that is like maybe your dating self versus your married self.
yeah.
Right? Like maybe you dress a little bit nicer when you're dating, you wash the car before you pick up your date.
Yeah.
And when you're married, some of that slips away. Like, trying to maintain more of that longer, I think is important. And that's tough to do over the long term. Another way to say it, depending on the, kind of the world you're in, but like your higher self versus your kind of, I don't know what the kids say these days, whatever kind of the common sloth self is or whatever, just like, cause that's still you, but it's kind of the better version of you. But at the same time, it's kind of like, I guess, as I'm thinking about it here and trying to put it into words, it's kind of like a Porsche, right? So if I have a Porsche, my dream car is the Porsche 911 Targa, right? So the top speed on that thing is ridiculous, right? But you can't drive it at top speed all the time.
Right. Yep.
And you can't drive it with the top down all the time.
But
that's when it's the flat. I mean, well, apparently not. You said it was cold in San Diego, so even in Southern California, you can't. Apparently. So yeah, so like the optimal version of that is, top down, high speed on a West Texas highway where the speed limit's 85 and you can do 110 and ticket's not going to be that bad if you ever get caught. Like, that's pretty good, right? But when you're driving around going to the grocery store, it's not going to be the same. Same car. Still feels nice to ride in it. Still looks nice, but it's the performance is different and the overall feel is different at some times.
Yep.
That's the way I guess I'm trying to rationalize it or think about it.
People tend to have multiple archetypes in their business, right? Like you are someone different when you are marketing versus when you're on a sales call. Like you might be a little bit toned down, or you might take on a slightly different personality, like when you're face to face with somebody. So yeah, it's good to make those distinctions.
Yeah. And I think we're all like that. And I think we're, we're a little bit different with, with one friend than we are another friend, right? It's just because it's a two-way street. It's a different situation. It's a different person. Like all that kind of stuff comes into play.
Yeah. And as far as offers, like the example that I like to use is Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. They're like the same product. They're the same. And Coca-Cola is...
That's a very polarizing stance right there, that they're the same.
I know. I'm not... I think they're both gross. But
I'm a Coke fan. I'm a Coke fan. My wife is a Pepsi fan. So,
are you guys?
And they're very distinct. Like, yeah, like it's a divided house when it comes to that.
Yeah, so. But the thing is, I personally think they taste very similar. They're both. It was the Cola Wars, right? Like it. So, but Pepsi has that fun-loving kind of more. Not childish, but they're like
pop culture.
And like adventurous, and they had like Britney Spears and Cynthia Crawford, whereas like Coca-Cola is like they're very nostalgic and family friendly, and they've got your like Christmas popcorn tins with a polar bear at your grandma's house. Like very different, very different voice, very different archetype, but basically the same offer. Like just slightly different.
Drink us and get fat.
Yep.
And get a sugar high. Yeah. release some dopamine and oxytocin or whatever else comes from sugar. Yeah, so that's good. I had something else I wanted to ask you.
You mentioned
Do you
AI.
have a
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we'll do that in just a second here. So with your clients, do you have an example of a client maybe that you kind of helped pivot? You don't have to name names, but and kind of give us an example of the steps and how you did that with them and what they started with and what they ended up with and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, let me think of a good example that's like, so yeah, I did have somebody who she teaches social media managers how to start their own business and like make their first 5K month. But that is what everyone's talking about.
Yeah,
So,
very, very basic biz op,
right.
right? It's that kind of that first, maybe
Right.
not the first, but definitely one of the early milestones, right? 5K a month, 10K a month, car
Yep.
payment, whatever.
Yep. So that messaging worked for a while. She built her business on it. She actually got to 7 figures with it. But after a while, the master classes that she was doing, the basically like her main funnel to get people into her 3-month program, like just wasn't working anymore. Just numbers dropped. So we looked at like, okay, who like in the most recent round of this, like one, can we see if there's some commonalities among like the kinds of people signing up? Like, is it stay-at-home moms? Is it people in corporate jobs who are like really trying to leave? And so we found that it is like those corporate people who are trying to leave. And so we kind of looked at that and went, okay, so what are a few angles that we think might resonate with them? Like what do we think is the problem, like the real problem that they're trying to solve? Like, yes, they want to become a social media manager, like a freelance social media manager to like leave their job, but like what is that deeper problem or desire? And so she had a ton of content that we could look back at, which is great. So we saw that like there were certain things that she'd talk about. It was mostly like security, like financial security. Like people were starting to feel really like, there are tons of layoffs happening. They weren't feeling like having that nice corporate job was all that safe anymore. And so we started leaning into that messaging, whereas like, well, is it really that unsafe to be a freelancer when you don't know when your employer is just going to pull the plug on you? So it was the same offer. She didn't change her master class. Like she taught the same thing in the master class. She was still offering the same 3-month program at the end of that master class. But by pivoting and speaking more directly to those corporate people and really playing up that like that
Insecurity.
fear, yeah. It started working again. One, it was more focused. It wasn't quite as generic. So it was much easier to control those like ad campaigns and like really speak directly to that one problem.
And what was she doing if she was talking to insecurity to corporate people with a new approach? What was she doing before? Like
before
was it just make money?
Yeah, it was just make money. It was like you can make money from your phone. Like you don't even have to be like at a desk. You could do it like,
So more
in
freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just she was attracting all kinds of people. She was actually also attracting like business owners who just wanted to learn more about social media management for themselves. So like it was kind of all over the place. And technically she could, you know, still have those people coming in. Like she could, have a few different campaigns for that. But overall, she knew that it wasn't working because she had basically just became like another faceless coach doing that. So she still kind of needed that stance for like her website and the overall messaging. And to your point earlier, like when people are afraid that it's too narrow and maybe it's not enough people, like you're not going to appeal to enough people to fill your program. The opposite happened, where like it was so much easier to fill it because it was just like this messaging really resonated. And as far as like what they absolutely did or did not have to do to get results, it was like, well, you absolutely have to like learn another skill basically as backup, if you want to have that security. Like this is not the same world that it used to be when you graduated college and you could just get a job and get the house and whatever. Like there's all this proof that that's not the world that we're in now. So you absolutely need this extra skill as backup and insurance. And so that messaging together was just like it hit because
And I could see how that would actually bring on a better client too, because they're going to be more committed. They're going to be
right.
More, if you've got a corporate worker who's used to following rules, they're probably going to finish your program, whereas if you're going after the, oh, this would be nice and I could go to the beach and work whenever I want, that person may not even finish the course.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're not actually helping that person because you're actually attracting the very type of person that's really not going to finish.
Yeah.
Or when you go after the other one, it's someone who's already has a track record of taking action and they'll, even though it's out of fear, they're going to take some action. Right.
And she also, as far as like touching on the third step, like who, the voice behind it, the feeling behind it, she leaned more into like that it's this nice, cozy community because these people are stressed. And so she was very nurturing and very like, it's just gonna be like sitting around with your girlfriends with some wine and we're just gonna learn this skill. Yeah. So it was like that perfect,
escape from corporate bureaucracy, all that stuff.
Yeah. And so then she kind of had this nice little like, that was how she was able to kind of stand out, is like now she was, more focused in that messaging. She was being the person and giving them the community that they needed, the offer that they needed at that time. So like it worked. So and that was fun to do because she did have a lot of stuff to look back at. So it was I mean, it almost kind of feels like cheating because we had those like recent rounds to look at and we're like, oh, well, this person seems to be signing up a lot. But
go ahead.
It can be that easy. Like people complicate it, like when it's time to pivot, when things aren't working, like people are so quick to want to start something new or like find some new strategy or new this. And it's like, you have so much data that you can go back and look at. You're probably sitting on a gold mine of clients still, or a gold mine of sales that you're just like not tapping into because you're not looking back at like what worked.
I love that fulfillment didn't have to change. It was just the positioning changed.
Yeah.
So just to recap, you said basically on step one, she went from kind of freedom, easy money to protecting yourself against insecurity, right? Which sounds the same on the surface, but as you start looking at it, it's very, very different, right?
Yep.
And then what was the step two part? Because the step three was the voice and that kind of stuff. What was step two?
So the strong stance. So you need to learn another skill. Doesn't matter if you have a nice cushy corporate job, like it's not safe.
And that would really resonate with corporate types who are probably A students, got the degrees, followed all the rules, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Like they're gonna lean into that. Oh yeah, that's what it is. I need another degree, basically, right? Or another certification or skill or whatever. That kind of all the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's a great distinction. Like if you're talking to people, I mean, that's a good insight. Realize if my ideal client was a former A student who followed the rules versus a C student who did as little as they could to get by, that's a very different person, even if you're selling the exact same thing even if they're in the corporate world, right? Like it's a different message. And my guess is a lot of her people that are coming on were probably good students, rule followers, and now they're feeling let down or betrayed by the system.
Yep.
Seeing the cracks in the system after all these years of following the rules.
Yeah, and that's why it works to know, like, the first step is knowing who you're talking to and what their real problem is, because you
Yeah.
can't really take a polarizing stance or a strong stance or whatever, or stand out if you don't know what's going to stand out to those people, because those people are also inundated with messaging around, like, optimize your LinkedIn profile and like just
Yeah.
double down on your skills so that you can like just continue to be in the corporate world and be safe, but like then someone comes along and they're like, well, the real safety is actually being able to leave and like actually being able to like be in charge of your own destiny. So that's why, you've got to start by knowing who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And that also goes to show, like, you've got to keep an eye on the market, because like at the time that we did that, that's when, every other news story was about layoffs and stuff. And so like looking at that, that's part of how we like came to that messaging, was like, okay, well, they see this. But like in a year or two from now, that's just going to be old news. Like everyone's going to be like, yeah, we know there were layoffs for years. We all found new skills.
Yeah.
So
So
that's,
she'll have
yeah,
to pivot again. Yeah.
right. Nothing, set it and forget it.
But that's pretty cool though, because I mean, there's a strategy there that she could put up a Google feed, news feed around layoffs, and then target. Like Tesla just laid off 10% of its workforce, right?
Yeah.
She'd do some Facebook targeting or some Google targeting around
Yeah.
Tesla and layoffs, and like write a quick blog or article, PR, press release around that.
Yep.
A lot of those people got nice severance packages, I'm sure.
Yep.
They've got a little runway probably because of the type of person it is. That she could do a launch off every like Fortune 100 layoff round, and get another 100, 200 students.
Yeah. That is the
Or,
ultimate turning lemons into lemonade.
yeah, exactly. Like that's so but you only get those kind of ideas when you're clear on who you're going after and what their big pain is. It's
Mhm.
interesting too, kind of comparing that to like the idea of niching, where you're trying to narrow down, but it's kind of funny because there's only what 6 or 7, I can't remember the number, like primal human needs.
Mhm. I
There's
think
not
it's
a
like,
lot of them.
no, it's like, I think it is like 5 or 6 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I was going to count
I
them.
was actually reading about that the other day. For some reason, 6 or 7 sounds right, but um, so it's kind of funny so that's actually pretty broad, right? That
Mhm.
it's only 7 for 7 billion, 8 billion people. They have the
Yep.
same 7 fears basically, but then you start layering, it's basic, that kind of math stuff, right? As soon as you lay variables on it and then you multiply that out, it becomes very unique very quickly.
Mhm. Yep.
So let's talk about AI real quick as we start to wrap up here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI as a copywriter, as a brand strategist? Like
I
intimidating, godsend? Like what's your strong stance on AI?
I think it's a great tool. I am all for uh, efficiency, and I was not intimidated because um, I never positioned myself as an order taker, right? Like I never sold words. If I
Right.
like sold myself as a wordsmith, I would have been real scared,
Yeah, if you
because
were on Fiverr doing 5 cents a word.
right. Or like in my messaging for clients, like I've always had the positioning of like, I help you generate revenue, not I write good words for you. So like that, I was not that nervous. It's made things a lot easier. I love like asking ChatGPT, like, hey, my ideal client is this type of person. What are 10 things they would say on their worst day? And like
Yeah.
having it like spit out stuff, because that's stuff that you can compile for copy, or to help you craft your messaging. So I love it. I wish that it was actually better at like writing a full-blown sales page. Maybe I'm just not using it to the best of its ability, but
Yeah, I haven't found one of the big public ones yet that can write a whole sales page.
mhm,
Claude is better at writing finished copy
mhm.
than Chat is. But even then, it needs an example to go by.
Yeah,
If
that
you
makes
give it an example to go by first, and then say use this as a format or template, and then change it to fit the avatar we've already talked about, then it can do a pretty good job.
yeah.
But it doesn't do finished copy quite as it's not there yet. I think it will be sooner than most copywriters are willing to admit.
Mhm.
And there's some specialized program tools, that are a little more expensive that have gotten very close. Um, but yeah, I agree. But for research, I think it's incredible.
Yeah. I
Like
have
you,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I was going to say, like, yeah, for research, I've got a couple prompts that I've gotten from different people to do research, and like the pains, the mistaken beliefs, the like all this stuff, and just like in 2 minutes, what used to take me 2 weeks to figure out and go through forums and everything else.
Yeah.
I just saw today there's a tool that will scrape, basically it's an AI that scrapes Reddit
Oh,
for
wow.
any question that you want, and it'll give you the most relevant answers from Reddit.
That's super
Um,
cool.
yeah, that's a pretty cool one. So yeah, stuff like that, it can really cut like research time and get you that authentic voice and the customer's words that you're looking for very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. I love it to like create client avatars, basically, like just
Yeah.
as a starting point. Um, I have it finish my sentences a lot
Yeah.
where I'm like, uh, so yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I think it's a great tool. I, I and again, like, a year ago would have been polarizing to say that, but now it's
I think
like,
it still is for if you, well, I think it is in the copywriting community because I think a lot of
yeah.
people are still scared of it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think a really smart copywriter will probably just not say they're using it, but use it.
Mhm.
Because I think if you say you're using it, it kind of devalues you a little bit right now. I think
Yeah.
that'll change in 2 years. I remember, I think it was Rich Schefrin who said last year, like maybe right after Chat came out, which is almost, I guess, it's 18 months now since Chat really kind of hit the scene.
Mhm.
Um, I remember him saying that within 2 to 3 years, people will prefer AI over a human because it'll be more accurate, and that
Mhm.
is already starting to happen. I saw an article today that said AI is outperforming ophthalmologists in diagnosing eye problems.
Well,
Yeah.
that's pretty wild.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Because they have instant access without bias to all these case files that they
Yeah.
can cross reference and look for patterns, which is what humans do, right? We look for patterns and we use our best judgment to say, okay, well, based on what I know, I think this is the solution. Well, if what you know is 10,000x, then you can come to a better conclusion, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
Hey, there's a good argument for my generalist philosophy right there.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
um, so, so yeah, I'm a big fan of AI. One thing I tell people is, especially right now, like treat it less like a tool and more like a toy, and you'll get better output.
You wanna elaborate on that? Like,
Sure.
how do you
So
how do you
I
do
will. So when I really start brainstorming with it, especially like doing client avatar stuff, I'll do stuff like pretend you're an FBI profiler or act as a FBI profiler and give me a a case file write up on, like, once I've got the basic avatar maybe figured out,
Mm-hmm.
corporate worker, blah, 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 then I'll say, now act as a FBI profiler and give me an in-depth profile on this person. And it'll be
That's
like,
pretty sweet.
and it's just the formatting is more fun to read. Like, so it's just more fun, right? And I'll
Yeah.
say, if this was a sitcom character, who would it be? And elaborate on the sitcom character and why they're like this, and give me some examples. Because
Yeah, that's
what I've
smart.
noticed is Chat GPT knows pop culture really well.
Yeah,
You've seen probably some of my Seinfeld write-ups.
of
Like,
course I have.
I'll get an idea and I'm like, oh, that would be a good Seinfeld episode. I go into chat and literally all I say is, write a Seinfeld episode about, and it's like, one sentence, and
Yeah.
it just nails it because it knows that show so well. Obviously, it's been trained, it's watched all the episodes, all that kind of stuff. So I think anytime you can kind of just have a little more fun with it, which, if you're brainstorming, that's what you should be. If you were brainstorming at a corporation, that's the way you should do it, right? But
Mhm.
everybody's insecurities get in the way and people don't really have fun with it. And chat doesn't care. Like, it has no feelings. So it'll just do what you tell it to do. Like, if you tell it to act silly, it'll act silly. If you tell it to act like an FBI profiler, it'll play the part.
Yeah.
So that's how I use it to kind of play with it. And it sparks more creativity for me. Because then when I see something come back, I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how could I expand that piece, that one line from the FBI profiler, file, because you know how it is as a copywriter, right? It's like one
Yeah.
line. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's gold. Like, that would have taken me weeks if I ever got to it to find
Yep.
that or to think
Yeah.
of it or spin the words just that way. That's where I find it really powerful. To
Yeah.
produce entire campaign or entire ad or an entire sales page, I haven't been able to get it to do that, but to give me the seed of an idea and then to work with it to massage. Same thing with books. Like, I'll have an idea for a book while I'm walking on a trail, walking my trail. And I'm like, oh, that's a good like book title. And I'll come back to chat, and in 20 minutes, I can have a very detailed outline of a book of that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's I part of the brand strategist certification that I did with Marty Newmeyer. The first half of that certification was all about disruptive thinking, and like we had um, a project that we were all doing together for Liquid Death, and we spent almost 2 days just in ideation. And we were allowed to use AI if we wanted to. But, everyone, we're being precious and purists about, like, no, we're gonna, we're gonna do it. But it was interesting to hear Marty's take on it at the end, because, he's an older guy and he's kind of like the grandfather of brand. And so everyone was expecting him to say that humans were far superior to AI, and he was like, no, you all need to get ready, because like that whole thing you just did, like you're not going to have to do that much longer, and it's probably going to outperform you very soon.
Yeah, well, when you understand that what makes an idea is two old ideas combined in a new way,
Mm-hmm.
you will very quickly realize you cannot outcompete AI.
Right.
Now, I know there's some people that would disagree and they say, well, I can pull from the quantum field and I can, the idea matrix and that kind of stuff. But maybe you get something truly new and unique, but I seriously doubt that. Like, there's, the old saying, there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we've had written history for a while, and most people have written thoughts, have been captured in that
Mm-hmm.
time. And they all say pretty much the same thing at the end of the day. It's just, how are you going to combine it and share it? And it's that combination. I remember Mike Palmer, who was my first copy chief. He's the guy that wrote End of America, which was a huge promotion. He did a talk at AWAI one year about this idea of combining ideas, and he used the example of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Right? It's like
that tracks.
Yeah, it's like teenage skaters.
Yep.
Mutants, ninjas, turtles. Like, you throw all that in a blender and you end up with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, you could have never thought of that on its own. Like, you had to have some reference of the parts to create that new whole.
Right.
And AI has more of those parts than anything on the planet. Your brain cannot hold that.
No, nor would we want to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you'd be psychotic, literally.
Yeah.
If you held that much information in your brain, and we have a lot of power in our subconscious and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think, and if you could learn to interact with it and to play with it in a brainstorming process, then it's just like, you're a senior copywriter and it's a junior copywriter, or you're a senior brand strategist, it's a junior brand strategist. They can go out and find all the data you need. Yeah. You just sit there and come up with the big ideas, and you're just like, go find me some data about this. Like, that's how I treat it. It's like an intern or a junior, whatever.
Yeah, it can coach you too. Like, I've asked it to ask me questions. Like, when I've been stuck, like before I was like, what do I do? Like, because I was like, I just kind of help people find their thing and like what makes them different. Like, what is that? And then one day I like typed that into ChatGPT and it was like, that's brand strategy. I was like, oh, cool. Good. Okay.
It's rolling its eyes. Oh, that's brand strategy. Come on. You got anything harder? Yeah. So hopefully it doesn't develop attitude anytime soon.
So the other day I was using one of my clients. He created a GPT or whatever, like a custom thing for academic writing. I was just seeing what it could do. I was just playing with it, and I asked it to write an article about the effects of stress on your liver. And it was like, okay, give me 20 to 30 minutes and I'll come back with some research. And I was like, okay. And then it like didn't. And I was like, what's your ETA? And it was like, oh, I'm still looking. I'll be back in 10 minutes. And I was like, okay, I've never seen ChatGPT do this before. Is it like learning how to BS me? Like, what is going on? And it was, because it never came back with anything. And I was like, where's the article? And it was like, oh, I'm still
something he like programmed into it, or
no? Because I asked him and he was like, I've never seen it do that. And I was like, well, is it like turning human or what?
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah.
That is wild. Wow. All right. Well, we could talk all day, Andrea, about this stuff, which is, it's how this show started, with me and Jonathan sitting at a pub talking about this stuff. But yeah, how can people learn more about what you do? I see you have something on I haven't pulled that site up yet. It
is disruptioncode.com. That's where you can get the guide that I've created with those 3 steps. So I call it the disruption code. So those 3 steps together, that's your disruption code. It basically becomes your filter for all of your messaging. I know Squarespace domains were down this morning. So maybe if you're looking at it like that, it might not come up.
Yeah, I'm seeing coding the future.
Try www.disruptioncode.com. All right. It was having issues with the DNS this morning. I was like, of course it is, because I'm going to be doing things.
There we go. That helped. All right, let me put this on the... Look at that photography. Is that you?
That is me. I was feeling dramatic that day.
Yeah, I see that. Like, wow. All right. So stand out, charge more, scale faster. I like that. Add the disruption code for free. So disruptioncode.com. Put the www in for now. Kind of the old school way until that gets solved. Yeah. So what are they going to learn? So what is this? Swipe my 3-step messaging framework to clearly communicate what you do, how it's different, and why you're worth every penny. All right. I like it. Any teaser you want to add to that, or is that enough?
This whole episode was basically a teaser to that. Okay. Basically taught what was inside of this, but this is more so that guide will actually, It's a Google Doc so that you can actually use it. Because what bothers me is like when people have a lead magnet, it's like all nice and designed, like I can't actually type into it. It bothers me a lot. So that you can actually create a copy and it goes through some of the specific questions that I actually ask my clients when they come to me with this stuff. I asked some of that, I like gave some of those examples while we were talking, but there are plenty more. So you can actually go through that guide. It might take you like an hour, but you will, I can almost guarantee that you will have better messaging by the end of it.
All right. Well, I just put my email in, so I'm gonna see. There it is. It's a Google Doc. You're right.
Yeah.
How'd you know that? Prophetic. All right. Any last words of wisdom for the audience?
Oh, no, that's too much pressure.
All right. I'm going to wrap us up. I'm going to put you, actually, I'm just going to wrap up with you on the screen and then I'll hit the end stream. But so, yeah, this was episode 350 of Persuasion by the Pint, Why It Pays to Be Polarizing with guest Andrea Brizendine, which, man, I still have a hard time with that last name. Like Brizendine. Like, I don't know. I'm terrible with names.
It's a whopper.
But yeah, you can find us anywhere podcasts are sold, Spotify, Apple, all the places. This is the part Jonathan usually does. So yeah, give us 5 stars if you're over there. If not, who cares? Whatever. We just do this for fun and to write off beer on our taxes. So do what you got to do. We'll see you next time. See you next week.
Bye. Thanks.